Center's 20. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Rennie Center's 2022 report on the condition of education in Massachusetts. Just going to give about 1 minute to allow people to log on, and then we'll get started in full. Thanks for joining us. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Rennie Center for Education Research and Policy's annual report on the condition of education in the Commonwealth. This year, we are looking at investing in educators, how Massachusetts can support teachers through the pandemic and beyond. To get us started, it is my privilege to introduce the Rennie Center's chair of our board of directors, Celine Coggins. Celine?
Thanks so much, Chad. And I see the audience is growing and growing. This is impressive that people are continuing to turn out like this over Zoom. Thank you. I'm really excited about today. So as Chad mentioned, my name is Celine Coggins. I'm the Executive Director of Grantmakers for Education, a nationwide network of about 300 grantmakers in the education space. I'm also the chair of the Rennie Center board. I'd like to welcome you to the Rennie Center's 2022 report on the condition of education in the Commonwealth. This is the 9th year of the condition of education, and that in itself is something to celebrate. I see it as an essential part of the secret sauce of Massachusetts education success nationally. Even in difficult times like now, we look at the data and use that, even when the trend lines aren't all pointing up, to identify the highest leverage ways to support kids and critically to support educators. At a time when many of us working in education policy, and I speak for myself here, are feeling disconnected from the day-to-day experience of schools after 2 years of limited chances for visits. This report is grounded in what practitioners and students are experiencing in real time. To do the research for the report, the Rennie team observed in the many schools you'll hear about today. They convened a teacher advisory council to make sure they got the perspective of educators right. This is what all of us in decision-making seats need right now. COE, as we call it, plays a central role in fulfilling the Rennie Center's mission to ensure educational decisions are based on deep knowledge and evidence of effective policymaking and practice. Its goal is a more coherent vision for education improvement that puts every child, especially those that have been historically neglected and marginalized, on a path to college, career, and life success. A key piece of COE is our action guide, which provides recommendations for statewide action. This year, as Chad just mentioned, the report is called Investing in Educators: How Massachusetts Can Support Teachers Through the Pandemic and Beyond. This is so needed right now. As most of you know, I've spent most of my career working with educators. There has never been a time that has been so challenging for so many educators as this one. The report identifies the types of supports teachers need now to both persevere in their own work and to address the varied and intense needs their students have entering the 3rd year of the pandemic. So much is being asked of teachers right now. In spite of the odds, the education workforce, from early educators to K-12 teachers to college and university professors, has gone above and beyond to support the Commonwealth students during this turbulence, but educators are stretched thin. Leading students through uncertain times has caused isolation, stress, and burnout. Research shows that 1 in 4 K-12 teachers was considering leaving their job at the end of last school year, and it seems like that number continues to rise. At this moment in time, it is critical to help teachers navigate these challenges, not by putting more on their plates, but by bolstering structures designed to assist them. In the 2022 Action Guide, we relay findings from research. Number 1, on immediate support to address student needs in the wake of COVID-19. Number 2, on ongoing supports that facilitate continuous learning and growth. And finally, on pipeline strategies for preparing prospective teachers to address the long-term effects of the pandemic. Too often, even in pre-COVID times, educators have been relied on to drive improvements in the education system by taking on new responsibilities and adjusting their practice with little input, agency, or support. In this report, Rennie aims to shift that narrative, looking not at what teachers can or should do now, but how we can invest in educators to lead to better and more sustainable practices in the future. I'm now delighted to turn things back over to the Rennie Center's Executive Director, Chad D'Entremont, to get us going and fully introduce the report. Thanks, Chad.
Thank you, Celine. Much appreciated. And I'm delighted to be here and have a chance to speak with everyone on Zoom. Although I do hope we will soon be able to again host this event in person as we look forward to our 10th anniversary. Allow me please to say a quick word about the Rennie Center and the COE project itself before handing things off to the team to provide a full review of this year's report. The Rennie Center views itself as an action tank, pairing original research with on-the-ground practice to promote effective change within schools and classrooms, and then share these experiences to inform statewide policy conversations. As I look back across the last few years and the challenges posed by the pandemic, I believe the work of the Rennie Center is more important than ever. As researchers, our team engaged to uncover new information that informs policy and practice. As conveners, we bridge the gap between stakeholders within the education system, leveraging our trusted part in constructive policy conversations. As expert advisors, we share what we know from our research and on-the-ground experience with policymakers and other leaders to achieve large-scale systems change. And as capacity builders, we help educators around Massachusetts and beyond use evidence-based practice to drive improvements within the education system. The Rennie Center is uniquely positioned within the Massachusetts education landscape to bring together knowledge from the field, from across sectors, and from around the country to find workable solutions to pressing educational problems. As we strive to recover from the COVID pandemic, the Rennie Center provides a central space for all of us to work together. As Celine mentioned, our annual report on the condition of education in the Commonwealth is critical to fulfilling the Rennie Center's mission. If we can back up one slide, please. This includes a data dashboard that tracks a range of indicators on educational access, key inputs, engagement in schools, and equitable outcomes for students. An education guide that provides research-informed recommendations for state actions to improve learning, and a series of activities to share these findings, including today's release event. This year's COE Action Guide builds on our ongoing efforts to support communities and districts in recovering from the pandemic, including our Back to School Blueprint, a series of interactive guides to support school leaders and practitioners in implementing new approaches to learning, and our study of a year in the life of Somerville Public Schools, documenting successes and lessons learned from school closures. Both of these resources are available on the Rennie Center's website. If we advance the slide, please. More specifically, the 2022 report explicitly examines how we can better support educators during COVID while not losing sight of the need to continue the hard work of confronting and remedying the inequities that have long plagued our education system, inequities that have existed long before COVID. As Celine mentioned, we are not, let me emphasize that, not seeking to add more things to teachers' plates. The last 2 years have been incredibly demanding, and educators have gone above and beyond. Asking them to do more is unimaginable. Rather, we ask, how can we build and strengthen support systems that provide educators with the time, space, and resources needed to adapt practices to the continually changing demands of the profession? Of course, this is easier said than done. And in a moment, it will be my privilege to introduce Rennie Center Senior Associate Sophie Zamarripa, who will share further findings from our research and examples of current programs, schools, and community-based organizations who are already doing this important work. But before I do so, please allow me a few thank yous. I would like to thank all individuals responsible for sharing information to support our research, including the COE Advisory Committee, the COE Teacher Advisory Committee, the Rennie Center Board, and Kamal Bashan, Graham Dodd, Justin Reich, Tori Trust, Courtney Tucker, and all of our interview subjects. And especially thanks to our 2022 program exemplars, including Amherst Pelham Regional Middle School, Revere Colleague to Colleague, Boston Public Schools Telescope Network, Great Schools Partnership, 5 District Partnership, Lawrence Community Works, and Lawrence Working Families Initiative, Project Coach, Sposato Graduate School of Education. Thank you all. We know you have so much on your plates, and taking time to meet with us and share the great work you're doing is invaluable for us to be able to document it and share it with the field. And now, please allow me to introduce Sophie to present the 2022 COE Action Guide in full. Sophie?
Thanks, Chad. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for being here today. My name is Sophie Zamarripa, and I'm a senior associate at the Rennie Center. It is my privilege to present the 2022 Condition of Education Action Guide to discuss actionable strategies and share relevant data on how to support the Commonwealth's educators. Before I begin, I wanted to acknowledge the hard work of my Rennie Center team. Thank you to Megan Bolsey, Erica Lee, Laura DeZorni, Chad Dontremont, Catherine Rossio, and Corinne Thomas. This work would not be possible without your tireless contributions. As Celine and Chad have shared, this year's report on the condition of education seeks to highlight how educators can be empowered to effectively meet the academic and social emotional needs of their students in 2022 and beyond through immediate supports, ongoing supports, and building a pipeline. As the past 2 years have unfolded, the education workforce from early childhood to K-12 to higher education has faced so much uncertainty and increasing demands to meet the pandemic head on. It is no surprise then that our field is exhausted. The pandemic's impact on educators, students, and families across the pipeline is apparent in the stories that we've heard from our program exemplars, as well as the data we have tracked for this year's data dashboard. Before we dive into the report, I wanted to share some of this year's findings. In early childhood, the percentage of children aged 0 to 5 eligible for financial assistance and enrolled in high-quality early education programs has slightly decreased to 63%. This decrease comes at a time where parents are deciding on care options for their children who do not yet qualify for a vaccine. High-quality early education experiences are important for children's future academic outcomes and provide a safe and welcoming environment that can support brain development, health and well-being, while mitigating trauma, a topic that we dig into more in our report. This data demonstrates there are children in the Commonwealth who may not be able to access or are not enrolling in early childhood care. In studying the educator pipeline, we continue to track data on diversity in both in-service and pre-service educators. In the 21-22 school year, 81% of all Massachusetts public school teachers identified as white, while only 55.7% of students identify in the same way. The highest gap exists between Hispanic Latinx students and their teachers at an 18% differential. In teacher preparation programs, white enrollment continues to dominate. However, in 2020, Hispanic Latinx enrollment was the highest it has been since we've tracked it, at 5.8% of all teacher candidates in Massachusetts. This year's action guide details different alternatives that ensure teachers of color are increasingly represented in the classroom. Moving on, for kindergarten through 12th grade, the chronic absenteeism rate spiked for all students from 13% to 17.7% in 2021. Within this spike, almost 1 in 3 English learners were chronically absent. Such an increase can have a negative repercussions on students' academic, social, emotional, and developmental outcomes. The COE report talks more about building a comprehensive ecosystem of support, not only to address students in and out of school needs, but to ensure that teachers are not left alone to care for their students. Finally, in higher education, the enrollment among first-time degree-seeking candidates decreased for UMass and state universities over the past year, while community colleges saw an 8% increase in this population. Unfortunately, among non-first years, enrollment fell across each of these 3 institution types. Decrease in enrollment may have been the result of income loss, childcare needs, illness, and lack of technology needed for remote studies. A promising trend is the recent uptick in first-time community college enrollment, since these institutions tend to serve low-income, first-generation, older, working students, or student parents. This is good news, but still not back to the pre-pandemic rate. You can see these indicators and many more located in our 2022 data dashboard and within the text of the action guide. So with all of this context in mind, let's dive into the report. Throughout our work at the Rennie Center, we have the unique opportunity to be in consistent communication with educators, school leaders, and other education stakeholders. Over the past year, nothing has been more apparent than the unprecedented levels of isolation, stress, and exhaustion across the system, among educators in particular. Rather than placing the onus on educators alone to shoulder the load of adapting to this moment, we hope to demonstrate how investing in educators can lead to better, more sustainable practices now and in the future. The way forward, as detailed in the report, is through trauma-sensitive practices that address the increasing level of non-academic barriers students are facing, culturally responsive practices that build supportive and inclusive classrooms, and innovative practices that make sure students' unfinished and future learning is addressed in creative and engaging ways. We describe these strategies in the context of the capacity for implementation, as you can see on the screen, meaning that immediate supports serve to triage urgent needs, ongoing supports serve to set up continuous structures for learning, and building a pipeline serves to create a diverse, effective, adaptive workforce for the long term. Within each of these phases, we detail the strategies featured, though not all encompassing, as methods of supporting educators in the Commonwealth. In order to navigate the challenges of COVID-19, educators need school environments that foster a culture of support and maintain focus on a core set of strategies. By building on what worked as a solution to pandemic-related challenges, addressing mental health and well-being, making space for collaborative collegial planning and coaching time, and offering just-in-time tools and resources, our system can strengthen trauma-sensitive approaches to teaching and learning, cultivate welcoming and inclusive classrooms, and pursue innovative solutions to unexpected challenges in the immediate term. One example of these immediate supports is the Colleague-to-Colleague program in Revere Public Schools, a peer-to-peer consultant initiative, teacher consultant initiative that is embedded into the school day, usually during planning blocks. Through this collaborative collegial planning and coaching time, good teachers are supported to be great teachers. Participants report increased well-being and feelings of support, and they remain in their positions at a higher rate. Consulting teachers bring out the strengths of participating teachers and celebrate their skills, as each teacher is regarded as having knowledge and expertise to share. Creating continuous experiences developed in conversation with teachers that engage educators in critical thinking around their practice is of great importance as the field continues to adapt to the pandemic. Without opportunities to explore gap areas in educators' practice, the greatest challenges facing students, teachers, and families may not be adequately addressed. By promoting teacher voice in their own professional learning opportunities, convening professional learning groups, and over time, establishing a comprehensive ecosystem of support across the community, educators can continuously improve their trauma-sensitive, culturally responsive, and innovative practices. Great Schools Partnerships has established an effective strategy for ongoing improvement by convening professional learning groups within their engagements across the country. By embedding 90 minutes of uninterrupted learning time into the school day, teacher facilitators work to create and sustain a supportive space conducive to collaboration and to design and facilitate meetings using protocols that will help address the common goals group members have identified. Many of the design considerations and practices embedded in effective PLGs were featured in GSP's work with Springfield Public Schools to develop a portrait of a graduate. Providing multiple entry points for future educators of all backgrounds and supporting the development of key skills can strengthen the pipeline. In order to engage future diverse educators to meet the needs of students, the pipeline should include opportunities for learn and earn practicum, early college high school models, connecting with the community, and engaging in diversified coaching methods. In addition, new teachers entering the field need support to adopt trauma-sensitive, culturally responsive, and innovative approaches in order to fully address students' academic and social emotional needs. The final example that I will share today is a collaboration between Lawrence Community Works and the Lawrence Working Families Initiative in Lawrence Public Schools. The educator training program, now in its 4th year, recruits parents and local community members into learn and earn programs focused on preparing paraprofessionals. Not only does this program increase the diversity and cultural reflection of the community inside the schools, it also improves families' financial stability. By highlighting the programs, schools, and organizations in this presentation and the report, we hope to shed light on how the Massachusetts education system can bolster our hardworking educators to effectively meet the academic and social emotional needs of students in 2022 and beyond. With the pandemic raging on and the teaching force facing unprecedented levels of burnout, we must focus on aiding educators and prospective educators across multiple contexts, immediately, in an ongoing way, and through our approach to teacher preparation. A core strategy for recovering from the pandemic and pushing the Commonwealth's education system forward is to invest in our teachers. Providing educators with the tools and resources they need to strengthen and evolve their craft will help to alleviate the intensity of the past few years and chart a way forward for the years to come. Thank you for your time. It is now my pleasure to turn it over to Dr. Jessica Boston Davis, the Director of Equity and Excellence at Somerville Public Schools. Jess recently led a conversation with representatives from the program exemplars I have just introduced to you. Before we watch a clip of that conversation, I'm going to turn it over to Jess to talk a little bit more about the panel. Jess, it's all yours.
Thank you, Sophie. I'm pleased to introduce the community panel, the snippet that we will watch together today. Educators have always been the lifelines of our schools. And even more so over the past 2 years, we have seen their resilience despite the overwhelming obstacles, twists, and turns that the pandemic has brought. In this community panel, I invite us to reflect on what happens when we invest in empowering educators, the very people who have invested so much of themselves in our students. And I think that you'll hear that in return, not only will the academic and socio-emotional needs be met for our students, but also highly effective practices for educators will be established, both for the challenging times now and long into the future. So with that, please enjoy this snippet of the community panel, and I hope that you will view the full panel at a later time. Closing, I'd love to hear from you. What is one change you hope to see in the way the education system supports educators in 2022 and beyond?
My answer to this question changed a little bit as I heard from my colleagues on the panel, and so I'll say that inherent in our definition of equity is the notion of raising voices and seating and acknowledging seating and sharing power. And I think first and foremost for me, if there's anything that we've learned and discovered over the course of this very challenging last 2 years, is that it's important for us to acknowledge and give each other permission to say that these 2 years have been really hard. That without a doubt, we have all struggled. And I think professional learning groups are really promising spaces and places where there's an opportunity for us to just sort of come together and just sort of share how we're doing and just give ourselves permission. And I think that the notion of my hope is that administrators and decision makers recognize the importance and the role and the value of creating that space for teachers, just as we want to ensure that students have a primary person, have agency, and are developing relationships and feel as though they're part of a community. It's really important to ensure that we're tending to that and ensuring that we're supporting teachers.
Okay, to Lawrence with Marinella and Catherine, can you share?
I would have to say we work with a community that's Spanish speaking predominantly, and a lot of these para teachers, it's difficult. Their native language isn't English. So these MTELs, I know the state have been talking about it. I know it's possibly in the works, but I would hope to see it where we're supporting them more through the process. The MTELs are not at all easy, as most of us know, but channeling it in a way where we can equip our paras to become teacher in a very easier way instead of having the MTEL over their head. Because we have those conversations constantly. This is why we developed the MTEL boot camp to try to get them over that hump. But it's been difficult. Many of them have tried and have not passed. So that's, I think, something that the state should look into deeper, especially when we want to diversify how.
Yes, I agree to that too. And as well, keep supporting every educator now with these hard times. And again, like more training, more also materials and all that support that they need to be able to do it. And also, let's not forget that they're also human beings, right? Like, make sure that in their personal life, they get the support that they need at the time that they need their family.
And then finally, back to Revere, Sarah and Stephanie, if you can share your thoughts on our closing question.
So I echo what everyone said. I think we teachers need more grace. They need more time. In that spirit, I think we need to bring the level of personalization that we want for our students to the adults. And I think we need to prioritize giving teachers time and space to direct their own learning, to set meaningful goals, both personally and professionally, and then be given that space as part of their job to work on that and to really dive deep into the adult learning that needs to happen to improve education for our children.
This question is really difficult for me because I can think of about 700 things I'd like to see change. To narrow it down to one feels really difficult. But I would piggyback on what everyone has said, and obviously that theme of, educators are humans first, and we need to continue on in that way, even after hopefully eventually the pressure of this pandemic comes off a bit. But I would also just say, if I'm going to dream really big, what I would love to see happen in schools is just an actual effort to make a really positive culture of feedback.
Closing,
Thank you, Jessica. And thank you to all the programs that participated in this year's report. You can view the full community conversation on the Rennie Center's website. And now on to today's panel. Each year, as part of COE, we ask our leading education officials to come together and discuss the state of our education system. This year, the conversation seems more important than ever. We are joined by Commissioner Samantha Aigner-Treworgy of the Massachusetts Department of Early Education and Care, Commissioner Jeffrey Riley from the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and Commissioner Carlos Santiago from the Massachusetts Department of Higher Education. Today's conversation will be moderated by Dr. John Jackson, President and CEO of the Schott Foundation for Public Education, and Michael S. Wotorson, Director of the National Opportunity to Learn Network, also at Schott. Schott has long been a critical voice in confronting and working hard to remedy systemic inequities in public education. And I believe John and Michael are both the perfect people to lead today's conversation. We have a long tradition at the Rennie Center of going short on intros and long on content, and all the panelists agreed to that. You can read more about them in their full bios that are part of the program's materials. But with that, let me step back and turn things over to John and Michael. Thank you to all of our panelists.
Thank you, Chad, and thank you for the great work that you all are doing at the Rennie Center. Michael and I are glad to have the opportunity to tag team today. So welcome to all of the commissioners. Before we begin, we just want to say we know that this has been a difficult time for many students, parents, educators, but definitely we want to thank you, commissioners, for your leadership during this period, which has been significant. I understand that Commissioner Sam is not with us yet, but as the commissioner joins us, we will integrate the commissioner into the conversation. So I want to start the conversation off with a question to you, Commissioner Riley. This year's report details strategies for both the immediate and long term to support educators, culturally responsive, innovative, and trauma-sensitive practices. What are some of the ways in which the department has engaged districts and school leaders to prioritize these supports?
Thanks so much for the question. I think, as both a former special education teacher and an adjustment counselor, we know that we've got to take care of our kids' most basic needs first. We know the pandemic has caused trauma. The mental health crisis has been real with our students. And so we've really focused our efforts on first working out our kids' most basic needs. We've continued that this year with our SEL Mental Health Academy and Culturally Responsive Teaching Academy. And that's, going out to over 149 districts that are enrolled. We've continued to roll out professional development opportunities, including our acceleration roadmap, which is kind of the way forward for us during this time of crisis. And key to the acceleration roadmap is this idea of fostering a sense of belonging. We know that kids were disconnected from their schooling when they were home, and we need to make sure that that isolation is mitigated and we're able to kind of really provide a school that gives kids the ability to feel reconnected to where they are. We've been working with our 15 most at-risk districts on our Learning Acceleration Network. Those are like monthly support sessions. 10 of them receive more frequent kind of job-embedded support related to learning acceleration. That includes things like culturally responsive practices and trauma-sensitive support, as well as sharing innovative practices. And we just continue to focus on our students' needs as we get them back into school, back into learning, recognizing that we've got to focus on our most basic needs first, right? One of the crucial things we did when this pandemic first hit was we set up feeding centers for our students. Oftentimes, many of our students get their meals in school, and when schools shut down, we had to make sure they still had access. We've since grown that to really focus on the social emotional needs and the culturally responsive aspects of teaching. And hopefully I'll get to talk more about this, but I think there's a recognition that kids are, even when they're in school, somewhat disengaged from their learning. And I think that's because we haven't always presented the appropriate material to them.
Thank you, Commissioner Riley. I want to come back to cover more substantively many of the culturally responsive initiatives that you have in place. But Michael, I want to open it up for you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. Commissioner Santiago, good morning, and good morning to all of you. I want us to stay just for a little bit longer on this theme that I think has now been opened around how institutions are responding to this unique moment. So, Commissioner Santiago, we know that the Department of Higher Education has put forth a very robust agenda for ensuring that public higher education opens doors of opportunity and fulfillment for traditionally underserved populations. The question is, from your standpoint, how has the pandemic challenged this agenda? And what steps has the department taken to support institutes of higher education in effectively serving students, particularly those who have been historically marginalized, as we've seen during this time?
Thank you, Michael, and congratulations to the Rennie Center on their annual report. The question that you posed, Michael, is one that has consumed a lot of our time and energy over the last 2 years. You look at the Rennie Center data that showed the decline in the community colleges in 2020. We saw that coming in April when we viewed the FAFSA completion rates among students, particularly students of color in our gateway cities, just plummeting. So we weren't all that surprised when we saw a decline in about a third initially of enrollments to our community college segment. And we worked very closely following that. I mean, the Rennie Center data shows that for the last year, the enrollments have gone up in the community colleges. And I would attribute that to working very closely with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education on a major campaign, statewide campaign to get students to complete the FAFSA form, because that's the only thing that's going to give them access to federal and state financial aid. So that's just one example. But we have now taken the position from an equity perspective, and our focus, we're very clear, it's on racial equity is our priority at this point. And we have looked at all of our policies and from an anti-racist perspective, quite frankly, and we are modifying them. They're changing them from access, promoting early college, making sure that Mass Grant Plus and financial aid covers the expenses of low-income students, to providing support services now in areas that we never did before. Basic needs, looking at homelessness, hunger, mental health issues among college students. And we do focus a lot on the community college segment because it is where 2/3 of our students of color that graduate from Massachusetts high schools are. So we think we're meeting students where their needs are greatest. And I have to give a real, shout out to the institutions, the public institutions that have stepped up and done this work, and the collaboration with other government agencies has been critical. So thank you for the question.
Well, I want to say welcome to Commissioner Aigner-Treworgy, Commissioner Sam. It's a pleasure to have you this morning. Just want to bring you into the conversation and start with a question around your work in early education. Early education child care centers have faced immense challenges throughout the pandemic, especially as children under 5 years of age aren't eligible for vaccination. In what ways has your department's strategic action plan changed to address the importance of child and youth outcomes that come from quality early education programs?
Thank you so much for having me, and for and to the Rennie Center for congratulations on I think some seminal work in how we support educators. I appreciate this question, and I want to give just a moment of background of how the strategic action plan came to be. I started just a few months before COVID in this role, and just to give you an idea of what EEC's role is in the Commonwealth, we oversee, as you mentioned, about 7,500 childcare providers in the state, as well as of an investment in communities to support children birth to 8. So I think that as we have, as I got to know the Commonwealth and traveled in my first few months back and forth, understanding the context that's so unique in Massachusetts. I have grown up here, but spent my professional career in Chicago before coming back for this role. We developed a strategic action plan that passed the day the state went into the Commonwealth went into a state of emergency, but really helped understand, I think, some critical components of the work that really helped ground us as we've been trying to rebuild and recalibrate through a recovery period. The strategic action plan focuses, and I think parallel to the way some of the report highlights, on educators as a critical component of the childcare system. The thing about our 7,500 or so providers is that they're private providers, and I think what the pandemic demonstrated is that they were providing a really critical infrastructure and public good that we didn't quite have the adequate systems to be able to resource in a way that could be sustained and provide the kind of stability families needed through this really tumultuous last couple of years. So as we have been engaging with our educator pillar of our strategic plan, we've really looked, I think, at the short and long-term investments that need to be made to be able to grow a really critical pipeline. When we think about early education and care, those humans, those people in the classrooms, in our family childcare homes, the 5,000 or so people who are caring for children in their home, they are the books and resources and for young children. Those interactions are what are the learning. The way you talk about building with blocks is how children are learning in those early years. And so making sure that we have a pipeline of well prepared, well compensated, and a career trajectory for people entering this really fragile field has been a critical component of the way we've invested in our strategic plan throughout the recovery period. So I just want to highlight 3 quick things that I think we'll have a chance hopefully to dig a little bit deeper in through the question and answer period. that we've been looking at. I think first is really understanding, as Commissioner Santiago highlighted, is the need for access to coursework, and really understanding that this field, which is largely private businesses recruiting a workforce, our educators are largely women of color, and the most underpaid in the education sector. So really making sure that we are creating pipelines that don't add financial burden to them in order to enter the field and be able to support our children is really critical for us. So investing in scholarships, investing in coursework, and investing in free pathways into the field, but then making sure once we have people in the field, they are supported in their work, as this really does highlight, as making sure that we are providing the kind of investment in this sector to see wages raise and be able to see the compensation that are really critical, our educators and those engaging with our children deserve for the kind of really difficult work this is, particularly with a traumatized population, as we know we come out with after a global impact like this. Making sure that those educators also have things like benefits and simple things in the ways we work with our programs to understand, like planning time, being able to step away and reflect so you can actually come and be your best self when you're working with children is a benefit often not afforded in our field to our educators, and is so critical to make sure that they can do their work every day. So really working to make sure we're investing in this, in our programs, in those that hire these educators, and to be able to kind of deliver these critical professionalization of the field as well. But then finally, the state's role and EEC's role of being able to make that a ladder, a pipeline, a career trajectory. You're not entering and then staying as a making minimum wage for the duration of your career, which we know so many people who've worked in childcare, in the childcare sector previously have encountered. And so I think that making for us developing a professional licensure process of a credential, an EC credential that helps verify and build that professional expertise you need over time. Because as we know, and as we've been talking about, it's both the knowledge that you need, but also the experience, and that is invaluable when you're learning about how to work with children over time and be able to show up and help your peers enter the field and grow their competency as well. So looking at a competency-based professional licensure is something EEC is looking for in the long term, medium to long term, to be able to help make, as we build a recruitment of this workforce, build the career pathway that can really help make this a profession as well. I want to say one more thing as we talk about this, and then I will close the first question. But I think one thing I want to highlight is when we talk about the workforce, I know there's a terminology question in our field that is always confusing, of where we talk about early education and care and when we're talking about childcare. When I'm talking about childcare, and our strategic action plan really does lay this out, is an infrastructure. It's really, we're talking about the programs, the childcare programs that are not in schools, they're sitting outside, they're independent businesses, but what is delivered inside that is the early care and education. Much like we talk about schools and colleges, that what's delivered inside that by those professionals, that is the education. And that's much like when I talk about personally the childcare infrastructure, but making sure that our professionals can deliver the high quality early care and education that's critical for our children to be successful in the long term. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. All substantive and critical points. Thank you.
So this, I think, gives us a great point to sort of segue into this question around balancing challenges with important aspirations. And I want to invite all of our panelists to weigh in and respond to this next question. So when we think about the phases of support that were just highlighted in the COE report, the immediate, ongoing, and building a pipeline, the question is, how do you think about balancing how you respond to the urgent needs, many of which we've already heard, alongside building up a stronger system of support for our teachers, for our students, and for our families as we move forward? So again, I want to invite all of you to weigh in.
So I think at DESE, we're incredibly proud of the resiliency that our educators have shown during this really tumultuous time. But it's also made us realize that we can't go back to what was business as usual. Our nurses, our educators, people are working so hard to keep our schools open every day. We're starting to come off the Omicron surge, and that's great. But, we also have to do the work going forward to make sure that we are planning for future needs. We've seen across the country in all sectors what they're calling the Great Resignation, and we're concerned about our workforce as well. And so we've reached out to the graduate schools of education to try to make sure that we are working to both increase our pipeline and work on projects like potentially graduate some of our aspiring teachers early. This is not dissimilar to what happened during World War II, where doctors and nurses graduated early to provide additional support. But we recognize there's just so much work to do in this area. And some of it's about advertising, and really letting people know that education is a great profession. Some of it's about compensation. And for the first time in a long time, there are dollars that have been flowing from the federal government that I hope will allow us to increase pay for not just teachers, they certainly deserve it as well, but also paraprofessionals and other school staff that frankly haven't always been compensated to the rate they need to be. And so I think in the coming days, you're going to see that kind of discussion so that we can maintain a quality workforce. The last thing I'd say, and I don't want to monopolize the discussion, is I think we also need to look at flexibilities for teachers. And one of the teachers earlier on the chat talked about self-directed growth for professional development. I think we need to find ways to allow teachers to have more opportunities to learn of things that are of interest to them. I talked earlier about how sometimes kids are disengaged with the content. Well, I think sometimes teachers are disengaged, and we all are curious. We all want to learn. But sometimes we're given a narrow set of things to choose from, and I think there should be more voice and choice for teachers going forward.
If I can just jump in from a higher education perspective, I think one of the things that the last few years has really taught us is that the organizations, the higher ed organizations, need to change. We are moving towards a really significant focus on students and students first, and moving away from the questions of, are these students ready for college, focusing on college ready students. We're flipping that a bit and saying, are our institutions ready for the changing student body that is coming to us? And the data, we've looked at this very empirically, and one of the fascinating observations is that for the students of color that are coming to us, it's not all about affordability. Everyone thinks if you can just get enough money into students' hands, they'll succeed. And what we've learned, especially during this pandemic, is that it is more complicated than that. And now the focus on support structures and a wide variety. I never thought we'd be have mental health as a critical priority in higher ed, but it's there, and we have to address it. So the landscape has changed. Our institutions need to change. One of the things that I do say that we've learned from this equity agenda and initiative, which is getting national recognition, is that you can't just say you're going to do work in equity without training and changing the organizations that are engaged and involved in this. If you think it's simply a matter of using particular language and saying we're going to do X, Y, and Z without changing the fundamental way in which organizations operate and how the staff within these organizations interact with each other, you're just not going to succeed. And I think that's a critical lesson that we've learned, and we're continuing to try to evolve and address it as well.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think this is really critical. And I think right now the urgency of, much like every sector, the thing that I hear most often from our providers and from the workforce is how the workforce crisis is impacting everyone, in that when we don't have enough staff works longer hours, whether that be a director stepping into a classroom, whether that be a family childcare trying to accommodate more children, and that's stressful for everyone. And so I think our immediate efforts are really trying to figure out two specific strategies to try to help alleviate that burden and enter have people enter the field. One is reducing as many barriers as possible, whether that be our own processes, and requiring a submission of something that we can try to empower our people on the ground to recognize and support those in their community who might be willing, even if not having all of the perfect documentation in place, and empower them to hire people. But then also, and I think Commissioner Santiago's point is really well taken, also build those on the ground resources to help navigate these systems that are unfamiliar to people. So we have, I think when you're entering a new profession or you're entering a new workforce, just figuring out how to call a community college and ask about the coursework that you would need to get in there can be difficult. And we hear from our field consistently that recruitment from those who work on like the career coaching side, that there are questions they can't answer because we're not really a system in childcare. We're building a system as we recover. And I think, so we've built a professional pathways coaching resource that will help people who are interested in joining the field to be able to call and learn what community colleges. They help match someone to the community college person who can help them navigate that specific coursework in their area. They help them connect with a professional development entity that will help get that hour or two of coursework that are training that would be needed to maintain that competency. And so really help build those human resources to be able to help new people and additional workforce into to be able to alleviate, we know, the real overburden that everyone is feeling right now.
You know, a common theme within this discussion has been the need for change. We can't go back to the way things were in the past. Can each of you talk a little bit about what innovations must we sustain and further advance in order for Massachusetts to remain a leader in education delivery coming out of the pandemic?
So in K-12, prior to the pandemic and when I first came on as commissioner, we really put our stamp on this idea that we need to diversify our educator workforce. I had come from Lawrence, where I saw some great community organizations earlier who continue that work. But as my time in Lawrence, we were able to nearly triple the educators of color in a 5-year period, by really being intentional about that. We know that in Massachusetts, we have about 40% of our students are students of color. But as you saw from an earlier graph, the vast majority of our teaching force and our educator force remains white. And we know the benefits that come with having a diverse workforce. The research is there that, one student of color that sees just one teacher that looks like them before 8th grade is more likely to graduate from high school and have better life outcomes. The research is clear, and yet we have not moved on this. I'm proud to say when I first came in as commissioner, this is kind of our top priority. And we've done many things in the space. We provided tangible financial support and incentives to recruit and retain teachers, things like college scholarships for undergraduates and paraprofessionals, loan reimbursement, signing bonuses for teachers, relocation allowances. And the one that's not talked about a lot, but I think you're going to hear more about, is something we did in Lawrence called mortgage assistance, where new teachers, many of them were Lawrence High School graduates, went to college, and we were able to get them to come back to work in the district and connect them to the NACA program, which, essentially if the mortgage rate today is 4%, we were able to get our new teachers' mortgage rates at 1 or 2%, which is just an incredible deal with no down payment, no closing costs. And essentially our Lawrence college graduates were moving back in and paying less than they would to rent in Lawrence. And now many of those teachers and administrators have sold their first house, made a good chunk of money, and are on to their next house. And so we think there's a way to make teaching more attractive, and all of these things, from scholarships to signing bonuses, are important. But mortgage assistance is also important in this kind of pantheon of inducements we want to bring to the field to make sure that we continue to get a more culturally diverse workforce. The other thing I would say is inside DESE, we're doing a lot too, from our Influence 100 work, our Kaleidoscope work, our diversity network, our teacher diversification grants. There's just so much going on that we are excited about making changes here. Someone mentioned earlier the idea about changing what licensure look like. We have brought an alternative pathway in for people that struggle with the MTEL to demonstrate competency. That is being rolled out. We've created emergency licenses. So we've really done many steps to try to diversify the field. And we think we're going to be so much better for doing it. I would also say that, we've made good progress already. I think we've seen gains of 1 to 2% in just the last couple of years by really being intentional about this. We recognize there's more work to be done, but I don't think there's many other states that are doing this work. So we're proud of that, and we know it needs to continue. I get to work with both commissioners on many things, but when I first came, Commissioner Santiago and I were barnstorming colleges to try to recruit people back into the education field. And that was some of the best work, I think, that we've done in the state in Massachusetts.
That's great.
Well, let me follow up on Commissioner Riley, and there's not a lot of barnstorming going on lately. Since March 2020, unfortunately. I really look forward to those visits. We focus our innovations in three particular points of intersection, critical intersection for students. The first is access, getting them into college. And we work very closely with the K through 12 school districts, the early college programs. We now have 5,000 students participating. We know it makes a huge difference. They will go on to college at higher rates than other students if they know and have had a college experience in high school. The data is very, very clear. We are shooting to grow that to close to 25,000 students. So it's a very ambitious initiative. The Mass Grant Plus program really focuses on affordability. We have, our goal is to eliminate unmet need for low-income students in our public institutions. And we have gotten very close to doing that in the community colleges, and we'll continue to expand it as well. We have, admissions programs, revamping admissions, moving away from the SAT to an SAT optional, which has shown a couple things. It has diversified our state universities at the entry level more than we had anticipated. And those students are succeeding at rates or higher rates than those students that took the SAT. So the question is, why did we have that exam? And we're questioning everything, and it's making a huge difference. The whole focus on supports, on student supports, is also going to be essential, because the second intersection point is retention. We're losing too many students. We get them in the door, it's a revolving door, and they wash out. And we have to make sure that we approach that from a student support perspective. There's a lot of investments going on in that area. And then the third intersection is graduation, making sure these students accumulate their credits through a seamless transfer system that we have across our public institutions, so they can go on and do whatever they want to do, whether it's to go on in schooling or go into the workforce or whatever their life ambitions are. So the innovations, we look at them very critically and from a empirical perspective, and ask ourselves continually, is this working? And if the decision is no, it's not working the way we anticipated, we'll move in a different direction pretty closely. But some of the innovations, the Mass Grant Plus, early college, they are paying off big dividends now, and we hope that that's going to continue.
Outstanding. Commissioner Sam?
Yeah, I would say I think that this last 22 months has forced so many innovations in this sector, and I would say for me and for the people I hear across the country, that it's just been, I think we've all had to think differently, and like my colleagues here, trying to focus on the ways we innovate and being strategic and thoughtful about that. I would say that there are two big areas that we've been trying to innovate in, forcing some different thinking specifically. One is around how we look at the childcare sector and the burden of the financial burden of childcare. I think that one of the things that has happened as we look at trying to recruit, having childcare, the childcare sector offer wages that can have well-trained, well-compensated, be attractive to well-trained, well-compensated workforce, takes revenue when you're talking about a private business. And all of our revenue comes from families with young children. And so to not overburden families of having to do that, we've had to think really creatively of using an infusion of federal funds differently for people who've never engaged in the public sector in many ways before. And so really looking at trying to think about incentivizing and sustaining and infusing those funds that would create stability, prevent more businesses in our sector from leaving, and prevent and creating more access challenges. That's been a really, that's been an opportunity for us to innovate and think differently about moving from this, the burden of operating the services for young children to parents alone, to trying to think about what is the public responsibility and how do we think about sustaining it over this really critical period, as we're trying to get people back to work and trying to get some sort of stability in our communities, needing this critical infrastructure to be able to serve that role. The second thing, and I think building on that, is that we have been innovating around, I think, has been in some of the collaborations with school districts, and in that building the seamless trajectory for children through some tumultuous couple of years. So being innovative in some of the investments we make with school districts to be able to coordinate with the providers, the private providers in their community, to build obviously the seamless trajectory from birth to 5 services into school entry, but also for our, we oversee the out of school time providers too. So many of the places where that families are relying on to be able to work in the to be able to work with extended hours, early hours, and after school vacation supports, things like that. And the way we've been able to innovate around building collaboration across these providers, I think, has the providers in the school districts through things like a summer step up program, in which we had 32 communities coming and building in-person services for 6 weeks over the summer across the school district, and the childcare providers who were all operating over the summer, to make sure we were leveraging every resource and creating and keeping families entry into school at the center of all of our work. So it's been, I think there's been some really creative ways, but I think, that's just to pick a couple. And I think we'll continue to try to learn every step of the way, and with my colleagues here, to make sure that Massachusetts continues to be a leader in leveraging this moment to build a more innovative and responsive system.
That's great. Michael, I know you have a question, then I want to get to a couple of these live questions.
Thank you, John. So actually, there are a lot of questions are coming from the audience around this idea of transforming the teaching environment, and we know that a key piece to all of these conversations has to do with community engagement. I wonder if you all might comment just briefly on what you think is most critical, most important about engaging community in a meaningful way in all of these conversations, as we try to figure out how to transform the environment for the betterment not only of teachers, but also for the students they teach and the families those kids come from.
I think it's such a great question. We need to rethink education, and in some ways, this pandemic has allowed us to rethink education, and in some ways it's kind of shaken the Etch-a-Sketch clear. One thing that I can say without question is that we've never fully brought our families into the K-12 space like we need to. I know as a superintendent in Lawrence, probably the most successful group I worked with was the Parents President's Council. This is the elected parents from every school. And we got more done. I got more information on the ground. We were really able to respond to parents and what they needed by meeting with them on a regular basis. But prior to my arrival, it seemed like in Lawrence, there was from the school perspective, there was this idea of bring us your kids at 8 a.m. You stay there, we'll give them back to you at 3 o'clock. And there wasn't that kind of connections. And I think we were losing something. And I think bringing parents in is going to be a key going forward in education, because they're our customers, right? We want parents to be involved in the process. We know the power that parents bring to the process when we are able to bring them in. And so that is something that we hope to continue to work on in deeper ways going forward.
And I would just add that one of the things that COVID has done is really, as Commissioner Riley mentioned, is just changed the teaching and learning process. And the one positive, there is a positive from COVID. The one positive is it forced our public institutions to look at online teaching and learning as a new sort of experience. We've been doing it on a relatively low level prior to the pandemic. But when it came and we had to close our institutions, there was a lot of training, there was technology transfer, there was all sorts of immediate responses to that new reality, which is your students aren't going to be able to come to the campus. And we also found that listening to students, some students liked it that way and other students didn't. Some wanted to go back to face-to-face. Others said, no, I kind of like this. And that really got us thinking that we need a better mix of face-to-face and online and remote learning. And we need to be good at both and have, strong educational experiences in both areas. So, when people ask me, is there any positive that has arisen over the last 2 years, I say, well, it has changed the way we think about teaching and learning, and realize that, if we're going to serve students and really do that seriously, you got to listen to them, and you have to take into account what they need, because it varies. You have childcare issues that's been mentioned, transportation issues, homelessness issues. You've got to take all these into account if you want to serve these students well.
I think that one of the things that actually EEC had been really focused on prior to my coming, and I think that the pandemic has really highlighted the need for investments not only in the educators themselves, but also the conditions that they're working in. And I think that, and really making sure that the leadership is there who understands how to support reflective practice, support not just showing up in the morning, closing your door and making sure the children don't get hurt, but really understanding how to provide the kind of structures and the kind of tools that I think we're just building many times in the early education and care field that can really support educators in showing up and doing their best practice or their best work every day. And so there's been a number of initiatives we worked on in terms of thinking about building leadership capacity in our programs, and really thinking about investments both for our center-based providers, making sure that we have leaders who understand what good practice in a classroom looks like, how to observe and respond and provide reflective practice for their educators, but also more difficult in much of the services that get delivered from our perspective are in family childcare homes with people who are of the community, neighbor, caring for neighbors' children, but also isolated with children all day long and not getting that kind of supports and systems and structures that we know allow you to sustain really, emotionally and academically rigorous, developmentally appropriate type of practices for young children. And so I think that part of it is building those structures and systems around our educators and those that we want to to be responsive to children every day, that allow the system to be responsive and supportive to them, which I think is a big investment. And I think it brings our work to the community as opposed to expecting our community providers to come to us. And I think that's been the focus of our work in that realm.
That's great. This seems to be our last question, and I know we're short on time, but I do want to take one live question. So I'm going to ask you an unfair question that you respond within 30 seconds, and to a big question. It's a summary of a number of questions, and the question is this: how might educators' professional learning time from early childhood to higher education settings be organized to transform the relationship teachers have with each other and the administrators, and unlock the conditions needed for anti-racist work? Only in 30 seconds.
Wow, I didn't know we were going to lightning round. That's a really profound question. I'm not sure we can do justice to it in 30 seconds. What I would say is, fundamentally, we are at an inflection point where we have to really rethink all of our systems and structures in K-12, and I would argue in our whole society. And the way to do that is through collaboration and dialogue and creating the spaces needed to really identify the issues and then working on making things better. Ultimately, we want to create a system that is better than the one we had before. So we're in a better place than we had before. We, as a country, we're in a really divisive place, and I think the only way through it is by doing this together.
That was great.
I would just very, very quickly, one of the things on the, did you know this kind of moment is that, did you know that staff and this goes back to the issue of organizational change, staff in the Department of Higher Education and staff in the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education get together and read books together as in groups, books that are critical for the work that we're all doing. And I think that's, I don't think we've ever done that before. It makes a huge difference when you have these conversations. And I look at it, from higher education's perspective, the most important work we do is we create knowledge and we disseminate it. But to do that, and to do that effectively, we have to have critical thinking students. And I know that the term critical often sets off alarm bells in certain communities, but the truth is we need our students to think critically. That's what we need now more than ever before, not only for the higher ed work and the work that you do along the entire pipeline, but for our own democracy. And that's what we're committed to doing. And everything that we do is got to focus on the student, and it's got to get them to be critical thinkers.
Yeah, I agreed with everything, and I think also the huge question. I would only add that we need to identify ways and pathways for communities to empower the work that they're doing, being responsive to communities, and I think breaking down those barriers. I think that as opposed to saying how do you achieve our benchmarks, understanding how can we invest in communities in a way that allow them to collaborate the way Commissioner Riley said, and I think grow the critical thinkers that take that kind of relationship-based work that can't be done from Boston to Springfield. It has to be done in communities and in that collaboration that we're building. We're really going to be transformative.
Oh, Michael, we're out of time. I just want to let the audience members know who asked questions that though we didn't get to all of your questions, you will receive some responses to your questions post discussion. Commissioner Aigner-Treworgy, Commissioner Riley, Commissioner Santiago, thank you so much for the discussion today. And thank you also for your leadership during this critical moment. Thank you. Back to you, Chad.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, John. Thank you, Michael. Thank you to our three commissioners. We really appreciate at such a busy time, everyone taking the time to meet and discuss these really pressing issues. Reflecting somewhat on John's comments, I'm struck by the fact that we all feel this great sense of urgency to fix the problems that we've experienced over the last couple of years, while acknowledging that we're really trying to get the root causes of historic inequities that have existed long before the pandemic. But when I step back, I have a younger daughter who's currently in 4th grade. She last had a normal, quote unquote, normal school year that wasn't disrupted in some way in 1st grade. The idea that this problem will be fixed tomorrow or next week, or even by the end of the school year, I think is nearsighted. Rather than racing as fast as we can to get things done, I think we need to work smartly and appropriately on an appropriate timeline to get things done the right way. And that will allow us to do the fundamental rethinking of these systems that Commissioner Riley suggested. It's too important not to do it right. With that, thanks again to our commissioners and to our moderators. I do want to acknowledge, as John did, that all the questions that were posed will be answered. We will follow up with the commissioners and their agencies and post them publicly, and we really appreciate people asking them. It's great to push the conversation forward. And at the Rennie Center, we will always readily admit we may not have the answers to everything. We may even be wrong on some things, but we are committed to continuing to work to try to find ways forward. With that, let me transition and introduce our Secretary of Education, Jim Peyser. Jim has been a regular presence at the COE release event. He always comes and provides open and candid feedback and reflections on where he thinks our current system is and what the administration is planning in the year ahead. We think it's an invaluable part of the day's event and really appreciate his willingness to engage. Secretary Peyser, thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chad. I appreciate it. And thanks to the whole Rennie Center team, not only for organizing today's event, of course, but for the outstanding work that you continue to do to bridge the gap between ideas and practice, curating and sponsoring research to help educators implement positive, data-informed change where it really counts in the classroom. I also want to thank you for including me in this annual event for the past 7 years and giving me the opportunity to offer some closing remarks today, which I suspect will probably be my last such benediction. Several times in years past, I've used this time slot to offer an overview of the governor's budget proposal. Unfortunately, since the budget will be unveiled later today, it's just a few hours too soon to run through the numbers. So instead, I'll try to provide something of a retrospective on the Baker-Polito administration's education program, including some of its major accomplishments and ongoing priorities, which will, of course, be reflected in the FY23 budget, as well as other initiatives, including our plans for allocating Federal American Rescue Plan or ARPA funds. But first, I'd like to thank all educators on this call and those who are working today in our early education programs, elementary and secondary schools, and colleges and universities. As I'm sure you're all tired of hearing, COVID was not in anyone's playbook 2 years ago, but it has dominated the lives of students and staff since that day back in March 2020, when everyone was asked to stay home for what we all thought would be just a few weeks at most. The fortitude, flexibility, compassion, and just plain hard work that educators at all levels have demonstrated and continue to display even now is a testament to their unwavering commitment to the well-being of their students and their communities. I'm deeply impressed, although not surprised, by your response to this crisis. And I know I speak for the governor and lieutenant governor when I tell you how deeply grateful we are for your service to the Commonwealth. Despite the challenges of COVID, both past and present, there is much that we've accomplished together since 2015, when Governor Baker was sworn into office. And when I say together, I include the legislature, the education agencies represented here today, nonprofit and philanthropic organizations, including the Rennie Center, of course, municipal officials, providers, schools and colleges, and of course, students and parents. As the governor said last night, the progress we have made is the product of collaboration and ultimately trust. Trust that we are all working towards the same end, improving the lives of our children and giving them opportunities for lifelong success and fulfillment, while creating stronger communities and a more prosperous and equitable Commonwealth. Yes, there have been disagreements along the way, but we should all count ourselves lucky that we live in a state where we can disagree and still come together to get things done in the public interest. This is certainly one of Governor Baker's greatest legacies in a time of national division and unrest. Looking back 7 years to January 2015, there were two overarching challenges. First, although Massachusetts' education system was and is consistently ranked #1 in the United States when it comes to overall academic achievement and degree attainment, our improvement has stalled, and we were often near the bottom when it came to persistent gaps between and among our communities and demographic subgroups. Second, even though our unemployment rate was low, there were still hundreds of thousands of working age adults who couldn't find jobs or were too discouraged to even look for work, while at the same time, employers large and small were turning away business because they couldn't find skilled workers to fill their many job vacancies. The bottom line was that despite the success of the Commonwealth was experiencing, both educationally and economically, there were underlying issues that were putting our success at risk and jeopardizing our hopes for a more just and equitable future. The challenges we faced back in 2015 are still with us, but I believe we have taken some important steps in the right direction to address them. In particular, I want to call out 3 principal themes: expanding educational opportunities and improving outcomes for all, strengthening and expanding STEM and career technical education, and improving college access, affordability, and completion. Regarding improving educational opportunities and outcomes, we've worked with the legislature to consistently and significantly increase our investments in early education and K-12. In early ed, we've increased spending by over 50%, not counting the hundreds of millions in COVID-related dollars that have begun to flow this year to stabilize the field and restore capacity. Of that amount, we've prioritized increasing provider rates by over $150 million in order to increase staff compensation and improve quality. And thanks to the leadership of Commissioner Aigner-Treworgy, we are now implementing a new parent fee schedule that is more transparent and equitable, including no fees at all for families with the lowest incomes. On the K-12 side, through this current school year, we've increased Chapter 70 spending by about $1.1 billion, an increase of over 25%, a number that will grow again in FY23. Equally important, we've made changes to the funding formula to make it more progressive, especially with respect to low-income students and English language learners, including an expanded factor for behavioral health services. This reform process began before the Student Opportunity Act, but importantly, SOA codified and expanded it. Of course, as you all know well, better outcomes are not simply a product of more money. It also requires policy change and effective implementation. On the policy front, there are several important actions worth noting. First, we've updated and revised our curriculum frameworks across the core academic subjects, including the addition of computer science. Second, we relaunched MCAS, taking the best of our original tests and integrating next generation assessment models, while at the same time transitioning to fully computer-based administration. And third, we overhauled our school accountability system, specifically to strengthen incentives for improvement, especially among our lowest performing students. In terms of practice, we have sharpened our focus on teaching and learning, both by identifying and promoting high quality curriculum and by supporting educators in developing and deploying instructional practices that engage students more deeply in their learning. Equally important, under the leadership of Commissioner Riley and his team, we have made diversifying the teacher corps and school leaders a top priority, as the Commissioner noted during the panel discussion. The strengthening and expansion of STEM and career technical education has been another central theme of this administration since day one. In the early days of the administration, Governor Baker formed the Workforce Skills Cabinet, bringing together the Secretariats of Education, Labor and Workforce Development, and Housing and Economic Development, in order to coordinate and integrate policies, programs, and resources to address the state's skills gaps. A central building block of the Workforce Skills Cabinet was the development of regional blueprints to establish the priorities of the 3 state agencies and local communities and organizations within each of 7 regions. Each blueprint identifies high impact industries, industry sectors and occupations in order to guide the development or expansion of aligned educational and career pathways. Using these blueprints, we set out to invest strategically in expanding career technical programs in relevant trades and developing new early career innovation pathways in critical industries. now up and running in over 50 high schools. A central part of this effort has been the Skills Capital Grant, which has directed over $100 million to upgrade equipment and expand capacity in high demand vocational programs. Today, there are 7,700 more students enrolled in Chapter 74 voc tech programs than there were in 2015, an increase of over 15%, even as overall public school enrollment has declined. We have leveraged this investment to launch the Career Technical Initiative, which the governor announced in his 2020 State of the Commonwealth address. The CTI initiative expands access to high quality vocational programs for high school students and adults by creating 3 shifts, one during the regular school day for vocational students, one in the afternoons for students enrolled in their local high school, and one in the evening for adult learners looking to change careers or upgrade their skills. Working with the State STEM Advisory Council, we also mobilized resources to increase opportunities for applied learning and paid internships in STEM fields, while launching STEM Week to galvanize public and private resources and to generate greater awareness of STEM career opportunities, especially among girls and young people of color who have long been underrepresented in these rapidly growing sectors. And finally, in higher education, under the leadership of Commissioner Santiago, we have sharpened our focus on access, affordability, and completion, all within a resolute focus on equity. 2 important initiatives stand out. First is early college, a joint project of the Board of Higher Education and the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. Early college provides well-designed supportive pathways for high school students who might not otherwise be on track for college to get the academic preparation and support they need to be ready for post-secondary success, including the ability to earn college credits at no cost while students are still in high school. Our 31 officially designated early college programs, now in over 40 high schools, are primarily enrolling students of color and first-generation students, the vast majority of whom are meeting mass score college readiness requirements while successfully completing credit-bearing college courses. And most encouraging, early college graduates are enrolling in college at significantly higher rates than their peers. A second major higher education initiative has been the expansion of financial aid. Since 2015, we have increased state-funded scholarships by over 40%, more than ever before, which has enabled us to launch Mass Grant Plus, as Commissioner Santiago mentioned, a last dollar need-based grant that enables thousands of low-income undergraduates to attend Massachusetts public colleges and universities without having to take on debt for tuition and instructional fees. You'll be hearing more about an expansion of Mass Grant Plus later today. Finally, working in partnership with the legislature, we enacted almost $1 billion in higher ed bond authorization and reoriented our building program to focus on the multi-billion-dollar backlog of deferred maintenance across almost all our public higher education campuses. In addition to adopting a fix-it-first mantra, we established a new process for making strategic investments in major projects, focusing on regional economic and workforce development priorities, maximizing space utilization, and aligning with campus and system-wide strategic plans, including the equity agenda. I think there's a lot to be proud of here. And even though we may have lost some momentum during COVID, we have continued to make forward progress. And I'm optimistic that we'll pick up the pace as we continue to emerge from the pandemic. Even with our successes, there is much work to be done. First and foremost, we must use the state and federal resources at hand at both the state and local level to help all our students get back on track, academically, developmentally, and emotionally. This work has already begun, but as Chad mentioned, it is far from over. Our students and our staff will need time to fully recover. But acknowledging that we must be patient and persistent cannot dampen our sense of urgency about accelerating the path forward as best we can. Among other things, this includes continued investment in childcare and early education to expand affordable access and to support the development of new delivery models that are better aligned to the needs of parents and employers in the so-called future of work. As part of this recovery process, I want to pay special attention to early literacy. Before the pandemic, only about half of our young students could meet grade level expectations in reading, which may be the most important foundational skill that all our children need to succeed in school and ultimately in life. The sad truth is we have made very little progress in improving reading proficiency over the years, and the early data suggest that COVID may have made things much worse for our youngest learners. We have to redouble our efforts to ensure that all children receive regular screening through 3rd grade and have access to high quality, evidence-based reading instruction, including phonics. And finally, we need to reevaluate our public higher education finance system, especially in light of shifting demographics, changing needs and expectations of students and employers, and a more challenging competitive environment. This work has already begun at the Board of Higher Education, but needs to continue and deepen in order to ensure a public higher education system that is strong, sustainable, and affordable. When I first became Secretary of Education, I said that we needed to value both continuity and change. A year from now, when there will be a new secretary standing before you, hopefully not on Zoom, it's my hope that they will bring new ideas and new energy to this work, while at the same time embracing and extending the work that all of us have done together, not just under this administration, but stretching back through many prior administrations and legislatures. In the meantime, there's a lot of work on our plate and a lot of good and hard work that needs to be done to fully restore our education system, to help our children and learners of all ages reach their goals and fulfill their potential, and to build a better, stronger Commonwealth that we can all be proud of. Thank you very much. Now back to you, Chad.
Secretary Peyser, once again, thank you for being with us and for sharing your thoughts, both on the work that has happened through the administration since it came into being, as well as where you see some of the challenges remaining. I want to share with you, I could not agree more. And hopefully this year's action guide captures the comments you made at the end of your remarks. Right now, we need immediate action. I don't want to gloss over that. It's immediate action that is focused, that is manageable, and that's impactful to support educators and address students' most pressing needs. We also need that tied to an ongoing strategy that sees the full path forward to recovery, so we can continue to work on it in the months ahead. And then finally, we need a long-term plan that puts us back on the path to restructuring our educational system to fully address deep-rooted inequities and ensure that all students, especially those who have been historically marginalized, find success in school, in work, and in life. I want to thank the Secretary. I want to thank our commissioners. I want to thank our moderators, all of the programs that participated in this year's COE release event. I also want to make special note and thank the Rennie Center team. This would not be possible without all of their great efforts. That includes Laura DeJourney, Catherine Razio, Corinne Thomas, Erica Lee, and especially lead author Sophie Zamarripa and contributing author Megan Volsey. Producing this work at a time where it hits, when it will inform budgetary decision-making and policy decisions for the year ahead is tricky, and it doesn't always lead to the most fun holidays. And I really am grateful for the commitment the Rennie Center team has in making sure that we're doing work that helps improve our education system. Today's event is just one item in a whole slew of activities that we do as part of what we call COE Week. Previously released was our panel discussion with community representatives to highlight program exemplars featured in this year's report. We have also released our data dashboard. This presentation and the full action guide are now on the Rennie Center's website, where you can find all of those materials. And coming up, we will be releasing a list of resources that allow readers to apply many of the strategies and models featured in this year's action guide in their own work. In the chat, you can see a link to the COE Week materials to follow up. Please continue the conversation, tweet, contact us directly, keep questions coming. If you want some time to reflect and enter them in later, you can reach out to us at info@Rennie Center or through Twitter. We're happy to add them to the list, and we'll be following up and posting answers to all of those questions publicly. And once again, thanks to everyone, and especially a last thanks to our audience for hearing about our report and participating in today's event. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.